This is A Story of Sorts, the podcast mostly about Turkish stuff. I'm Karina Pereira, and on today's episode I bring you a list of books that will give you those October vibes. During last week, I was wondering what I would talk about on this episode, since in the last few months I've been mostly doing lists, and lists that have something to do with the month we are in or with whatever we are celebrating during that month. So for October, and because I think October is becoming more and more my favorite month of the year, I decided to bring you a list of books that bring in me October vibes. And maybe they are not exactly spooky, or maybe there isn't exactly one specific reason in the book that makes me think of October, but it just brings me those vibes. So I just thought you would appreciate another list of books that you can read for Halloween or during the month of October. Although, of course, those are books that I really enjoyed and you can read throughout the year. If you have read any of these books, it would really be cool if you would come and talk to me on Instagram or on Twitter about which vibes these books give you, and to see if they are different from mine or the same. So let's get into it. I'm starting with Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell. This is a graphic novel that I've read last year, and it's super sweet. Of course, it is obviously an October read. It couldn't be more October than this. They are two friends who are on a pumpkin patch, and it's a super sweet but also fun and funny story, and it has a sweet ending as well. The illustrations are very, very cute, and it just reads very fast. It's a graphic novel. It's not too long. I read it in maybe a couple of hours. I think it's worth reading just for the aesthetic, but the story is also really nice. Next one on the list is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I have been thinking about Shirley Jackson a bit since I saw the biopic Shirley, and I have decided to read The Haunting of Hill House a few weeks ago after watching the biopic. But We Have Always Lived in the Castle was one of my favorite books from last year. I just adored it. There is nothing about this book that I would have changed. The characters are perfect. The way that Shirley drove the whole story is amazing, and the ending is absolutely perfect. I was kind of worried as I was listening to the audiobook that she was going to give us a softer ending, but she did not, and I love it. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I read this book a few years ago and I really enjoyed it. The whole thing, it's one of those books in which you know what's going to happen, or actually what happened from the beginning. There is a murder, you know that from the beginning. So the rest of the book is basically you finding out what happened, how did the murder happen. And it just keeps you very enthralled. Even though you know what's going to happen, you really want to figure out what exactly happened. Give me the details. I know that a lot of people dislike this book because it's quite a long book, and many say that it has stuff in it that it's really not necessary, so it shouldn't be such a huge book. And I usually dislike books that have, words just for the sake of quantity rather than for the sake of history. But for some reason, I just read this one really fast, and I really loved it as well. Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I am reading this one and I don't want to say anything about it. I don't want to say yet if I'm enjoying it or not. But it's another read because there you go. Cemetery, Dia de los Muertos. It just brings out that Halloween vibe. So I really had to bring it here. And it's a new book and I am reading it at this moment. Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. I read this book for a book club back in January. Seems like last year already. And although this was maybe the strangest book I've read, in a sense that when I was reading it, I was a bit bored by it. And I was kind of like dragging reading it. But as soon as it was over, I had this epiphany of, wow, this book is amazing. This never happened with another book before. I either like it as I am reading it and then I like it at the end, or I dislike it while I'm reading it, or sometimes it does get better at the end. But this one was really like that. And people at the book club asked me, would you recommend it? Yes. Would you read it again? Probably not. But I would really recommend it. And I think it's an amazing book. The main character is really interesting. A bit insane maybe in some ways. But I just adore this book. And for some reason, it also, even though there's nothing there about October or autumn or anything, it just gives me October vibes. So there you go. It's also, the author was nominated and won the Nobel Prize. And I'm curious to read her other books, but I'm a bit daunted by how big they are. Because the ones that I saw anyway, they were really, really big. And again, because I didn't really know what to make of the book and of the writing throughout, I'm a bit afraid that I will start reading it and it will also bore me. But if any of her other books are anything like this one, I would really recommend it. Educated by Tartt Westover. This is one of my favorite memoirs, maybe because I was raised a Catholic. And this is a story about a girl who was raised in a Mormon family who was preparing for the end of the world. I continue to recommend this book. I made actually an episode, a bonus episode about it because it's so well written and the story is so interesting and it's so hard to believe that they lived the way that they lived. And again, for some reason, don't know why, don't ask me, it also gives me autumn vibes. The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. This was my first book by Isabel Allende, and I think that all the recommendations that I had heard before, they are justified. I enjoyed it. I didn't consider it scary, to be honest. And it also, again, maybe because of the spirits, October vibes. The Toni Morrison Book Club by Judy Bennett, Winifred Brown-Glaude, Cassandra Jackson, and Piper Kendricks Williams. This book made me cry, and I read it even before I had read anything by Toni Morrison. And of course, if you are going to read any book by Toni Morrison, especially The Bluest Eye and Beloved, you are going to get spoilers. I did get spoilers. I don't think it's gonna, per se, spoil your reading of the books. But it was super interesting for me to get to know Toni Morrison's books before I actually got to read them. It was super interesting as well because it's, again, a memoir. The 4 people who wrote the story, they pick up one of Toni Morrison's books and then they put what's written on the book in perspective to our world currently, but also into their lives, the things that they've been through, and even how they saw, for example, a book before an event in their lives happened and afterwards. So it's really interesting. And for example, I tried to read Beloved by Toni Morrison and I couldn't finish it. So it's nice to have had this perspective and to know about the book even without reading it. Lumberjanes by Shannon Waters, Grace Ellis, Brooklyn Allen, and Noelle Stevenson. I really like Lumberjanes. I like the first book more than I like the second, but I'm very excited that they're going to make a new series of it. And again, maybe it's because they are, in the middle of the forest and they go in adventures and they're scary things, but they also give me some Halloween October vibes. And it's a graphic novel. Again, it's easy and you can read it quick. So I would really recommend it if you haven't yet read it. Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. There's a romance in here. I don't talk about romance very often. I don't read romance as much as I used to, unfortunately, I think, because I think romance is really fun. And it's the kind of stories that you usually read to escape from the real world sometimes when it gets too heavy. And Get a Life, Chloe Brown wasn't just a romance, it's a comedy and it's hilarious. I listened to the audiobook, which is also really good. So if you are looking for romance to read this October, I recommend it. Hilda by Luke Pearson. I fell in love with graphic novels because of Hilda mainly. I started reading more in Dutch because of Hilda as well, since I found the book in a Dutch bookstore in Dutch, and I liked the art concept so much, and it seemed so cool that it had a girl as the main character that I decided to buy it. And I've seen the Netflix series, which is a really, nice complement to the graphic novels. And I just love Hilda so much. And I definitely want to add the last book to my collection, which I haven't yet read. So if you're thinking about going camping right now, it's also a perfect tale for camping. Might be a bit, not for the faint of the heart. But Hilda is very brave, and she goes on a lot of adventures, and lots of weird stuff happens as well. And I really, really enjoy it. The last book of these recommendations is the book I brought for the last episode of Wrecked. So that was 2 weeks ago, and it's The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, for obvious reasons. If you have heard the episode, you know that it's one of my favorite books. It's on my top 5. And of course, it's in a graveyard. There's like this boy growing up, being raised by the ghosts of the graveyard. It's an excellent story. Lots of adventure. And I think it's just the October spirit is in there. I hope you find some inspiration for your October reads with this list. And of course, if you have any book that you think brings the October vibe, Halloween vibe, just send it my way. I don't usually read horror, but if you have a good horror recommendation, I'm down for it. You can find my social media on linktree/Karina Pereira. I'll be back in 2 weeks with the last main episode of season 1 of A Story of Sorts, and I'll talk to you then. And I think it's worth reading just... Oh, shut it! Okay, I guess the bird wants to be in the podcast now. They will not shut up. Thank you.